Hello and good morning, evening or afternoon, depending on when you are tuning into this latest Edie Susty Talk interview. This series has been going for a little more than a year now, and it's designed to keep us all feeling a little bit more connected to the sustainability conversation, while most of us really work from home or otherwise change our working patterns. And I'm delighted to have Nick Lyth on the call today, who is the CEO and co-founder of the Green Angel Syndicate, to talk about green investment and finance. So thank you so much for your time, Nick. How are you today?
Yes, very well, thanks, Sarah. It's a real pleasure to be interviewed by you. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. I presume, like me, that you're at home today.
I am. I'm at home, Sarah. I'm at home today, and I've been at home today for the last year and a half.
Same, completely same. So we've got around 20 minutes booked in to our calendar here. So I think the obvious place to start is for listeners who aren't aware of the syndicate, about what it does, how it's grown since its inception, and what in the first instance motivated you to co-found it.
Yeah, what it does, Green Angel Syndicate is now one of the largest angel investment syndicates in the UK, and it is the only one which specializes in the fight against climate change. So what that means it does is it makes investments in startup and early stage companies, and the companies that we really like are developing technologies, innovative technologies in it's particularly resource use sectors. So energy and all the different varieties of energy storage, energy efficiency, energy distribution, not just renewable energy technologies, but we like those as well, of course. Food and agriculture, the second big resource area, water, waste and recycling, natural resources. Now, these resources are the resources that the misuse of which has been in large measure the cause of the problem that we're facing with climate change. Mm-hmm. And yet we can't in fact live without them. Can't live without food, can't live without water, can't live without energy. We are consequently absolutely obliged to continue to access the resources that we need using means which are not doing further damage to the planet. And so those technologies, the technologies that we look to invest in the startup and early stage companies that we invest in, are technologies which we require to reduce carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, and or remove carbon from the atmosphere. And so the way we measure the success or potential success, bearing in mind that a lot of the companies that we invest in are not yet trading. They're still developing their technology. And if they are trading, they're at the very early stages. So the way we measure what they're going to achieve, first and foremost, is by calculating their potential carbon emission reduction, or their potential greenhouse gas emission reduction, or their potential removal of carbon from the atmosphere. So that's essentially what we do. We are an investors club, and we're wanting as many people as possible to join so that we can increase our bandwidth. But unlike all other angel syndicates, we are purpose driven, and our purpose is to fight climate change. And so in a way, yes, we're looking for profit, but the profit we're looking for is profit to the planet and to the global community living on the planet. The profit we're also looking for is financial, but the two go together. If the companies that we invest in fail, they're not going to make a difference in the fight against climate change. We want them to be successful and for their technologies to be successful and to be adopted globally in order for them to make a real difference to the fight against climate change. So that's what we do. I'll move on to a little bit about why I founded it and explain that. Unless you feel I haven't made it entirely clear, Sarah.
No, I guess it would be good to hear a little bit about your background, because surely there must have been a personal motivation as well as this moral motivation to invest in these solutions to the climate crisis.
Yes, very much so. 10 years before I set up Green Angel Syndicate, I'd been running an applied research institute that's specialized in resource use sectors, all the same sectors I've just mentioned: energy, food, water, waste and recycling, and so on. And this applied research institute was mainly funded in project work by the EU, and it ran European projects, partner projects. So partners from all over Europe would collect together to test the technology or technology innovations or process innovations that were coming through, and test them in an applied context, proper applied research, as opposed to lab research where which is much purer. I spent 10 years running this institute and loved it, and did some incredibly interesting work, which was really showing how to open the door into the changes in the process, changes in the processes we need to shift from a hydrocarbon-based economy to a non-hydrocarbon-based economy. But my frustration was that nobody knew how to commercialize them. So all of these partnerships were very much public sector based, and I felt very frustrated because I could see them going to waste. Meanwhile, I could see the problems of climate change getting worse and worse and worse. And on the one hand, I thought, I come from the private sector. My background is marketing and sales. And my original working life was all in the London advertising industry, which was where I really cut my teeth, promoting the sale and consumption of those very products that I'm now working my hardest to suppress. So I knew how to commercialize them. And I was also intensely frustrated by the fact that the rest of the world, the rest of the business world, seemed to me to be burying its head in the sand about climate change, actually willfully neglecting it. In the case of the oil and gas industry, absolutely willfully briefing against climate change in the most scandalously hypocritical way. They all knew they were lying. They just went on deliberately spending not just millions but billions of dollars over the years on publicity that countered all of the arguments that science was putting forward about climate change. So I felt we are fools. We need to confront the problem that we are facing in a way that is honest and clear. And so I set up Green Angel Syndicate to be the investment syndicate that would be the only one in the UK that was engaged in the fight against climate change. In the very early days, I set it up as an experiment at first in 2013. And in those days, I didn't use the word climate change because it was so controversial. Everybody was arguing about it, and I thought, I don't want to go there. What I want to do is do something that's positive that nobody can argue about. So I talked about the resource use issues rather than about climate change. Right. So there are these huge issues that we've got to solve, and we can see the problems. We don't need to argue about them in the way that we're arguing about whether climate change is happening or not, because it's a prediction. With resource use, we can see drought in Eastern Africa. We can see floods and problems in the Midwest of the US. We can see how there was 3 or 4 years ago, there was Cape Town ran out of water. Yeah. We can see all of this. There's no need to argue. That's the problem we're trying to solve. And so what I used to say in those days is we're the only angel syndicate engaged in the green economy, hence Green Angel Syndicate. I changed all of that 3 years ago, when the shocking IPCC report revealed that we'd got it all wrong, even as late as Paris in 2015. We'd got it all wrong, thinking that we could control this and that we were safe in setting targets for 2050 and 2100, that we already have a plus 1.5 degree rise in temperature baked in. It's going to happen. There is nothing we can do to avoid it. Plus 2 degrees is going to happen. Plus 1.5 degrees will happen before 2030. Plus 2 degrees is going to happen by 2050, if not earlier, if we do nothing. But if we do start to do the right things now, we might avoid plus 2 degrees and end up somewhere between plus 1.5 and plus 2. But at plus 1.5, between plus 1.5 and plus 2, we're in disaster scenario. We're not anywhere comfortable. And so it was that report that made me say, well, climate change is here, along with the wildfires in Australia and California, and the flooding, the extreme weather events that we're getting here in the UK. So that made me change the narrative to being specifically about the fight against climate change.
I was going to say that since 2013, this conversation has changed so much. And I've heard in the wake of that IPCC report from ministers of different parties and different parts of the UK that essentially it's no longer a question of whether the UK should get to net zero and the world should do the same, but which technologies and process changes we should make and when. So that's where the argument is now, more than about denial and acceptance. And I know you've talked there about the need to back some of these early stage innovations, but also the need to, avoid greenwashing. And you mentioned providing honest and clear solutions. And at the moment, we're in a situation here in the UK where ministers are being accused of not being honest and clear by backing, for example, nuclear fusion and fission that's coming in the 2030s, 2040s, looking at things like sustainable aviation fuels and hydrogen that again are a little less mature. So I wanted to get really your view on that broader balance between making sure we back the solutions that already exist or that are mature or nearly mature, those emerging technologies you mentioned, and then some of these moonshots as well. I'd like to get your view on where the syndicate's work fits into that bigger picture of what to go for and when, essentially.
I think the answer to that question has to be practical. And if we're going to make a practical difference, we've got to face the fact that we're trying to change an entire system of accessing the goods and services we access as a global economy. And in order to do that, I mean, Mark Carney has called it the biggest investment opportunity in history, because we're having to change everything, and we're having to change it now. And that means it really is a big investment opportunity. But I think the answer to your question is a practical one. It means that the changes all must be integrated, but they must be granular. And that's why grassroots innovation of the kind that we invest in is critical. Without getting this right, we're not going to get anything else right, because you have to build it up. It can't come from the top down. And so building it, there's a little model to understand what we do. Take wind energy, take renewable energy. We love renewable energy, yes. So we're interested in that, but we've got to go deeper. Let's say wind energy. We like wind energy. Yeah. No, deeper still. Wind, offshore wind. Yes, specifically offshore wind. No, but we've got to go deeper still. The turbines that are required for offshore wind. Yeah, no, but deeper still. The blades. No, but actually, the thing that really matters starts with the coating on the blades. That's what we're interested in. We're interested in we've got to get the coating on the blades right. Otherwise, our grand schemes for offshore wind will all go wrong, because the blades will just decay and rust, and you'll have spent millions, if not billions, putting up offshore wind installations that'll all be dysfunctional within 5 years. The coating on the blades, the material that the blade is made from, it's granular. You've got to get the granular innovations right, and that is practical. So when you look at what the coating should be on the blades for offshore wind, it may use technology that already exists, paint technology that already exists, but just use it in a new way. Or it may require something that simply doesn't exist at the moment, in which case it is completely innovative. So you've got to be stimulating everything. It's all innovation. So I would say all of that's got to come together. You mentioned the grand schemes. That there's a term for that sector which is called geoengineering. Geoengineering is when you re-engineer the geosphere. The geosphere is what we all live in, and so this is talking about changes at a grand level. We know, for example, that some of the things that have had the most extreme cooling effects on the planet and instantaneous cooling effects on the planet have been the explosions of supervolcanoes. So Krakatoa in the late 19th century, for example, was documented as causing the changes in global temperatures that lasted for as long as 3 or 4 years. So geoengineering is when you say, well, we are aware that if you can mimic the effect of a supervolcano explosion, you will cool the planet. And there are a lot of people working on that. It doesn't tend to get talked about because it's terrifying. I mean, we've never done this before. You're talking about an intervention at an enormous scale, and you don't know what the unexpected consequences are going to be. And so it's quite frightening. There's geoengineering going on in the atmosphere, applied to the atmosphere. Geoengineering projects or experiments are going on applied to the ocean. Geoengineering experiments are going on applied to land. And they're all happening in the background. They won't come, we won't see, Green Angel Syndicate won't see them because they're at a very, very grand, it's the equivalent of the nuclear bomb developments during the Second World War. You know, there was an American program to develop it that ended up at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which was just funded by the government. Because it was wartime, it was top secret, obviously. But these geoengineering projects tend to be big, either government, public sector funded. So we don't see them, Sarah.
That makes complete sense. And we've talked there about the exact technologies, and I wanted to talk a bit about sort of the storytelling part, because you've mentioned there, you've said both, you've quoted that Mark Carney quote, often quoted, that this is a major investment opportunity, perhaps the biggest in history and certainly the biggest in our lifetimes, and that profit for the planet is ultimately at this point financial profit as well, due to the nature of how the conversation has changed. So I wanted to get your view as someone that specialises in promoting the fight against climate change as an investment opportunity, as to how we could do that better. So just for context, personally, I covered a survey from Base and DEFRA, results of which came out in June. They polled 7,000 people and asked whether they believe that the net zero transition will boost the economy, and it was a 50-50 split. Only 50% of people said yes. So how do we better tell this story that this is good for the economy and is an investment opportunity?
Well, I would say I would put us in the forefront, and I would say to people, get behind us and what we're doing and what we're saying. And that, I don't mean that simply by the means of saying join Green Angel Syndicate and invest. Well, I'd love you all to do that. What I mean is follow our narrative. The reason why people aren't convinced is because the bulk of the business and political world that are talking about it are talking about the wrong thing. It's worse than that. They're using terminology like ESG and like sustainability and like SRI, a whole load of acronyms. What do they mean? Who knows? I don't know, and I've been working in the field for 20 years. I know what they want to pretend it means, and I know how they want to use it. They want to use it to virtue signal. They want to actually continue to do essentially the things that they've all been doing and been felt comfortable doing. And the reason why it's so useful to that world, along with corporate social responsibility before it, is because they can hide behind it. So you've got, for example, some reputable ESG funds in the investment world who are investing in oil and gas companies. They're investing in tobacco companies. They're investing in armaments companies. They're even investing in gaming companies. These are reputable, serious, intelligent, intelligible funds run by established fund management companies, and they call them ESG funds. When challenged, they say, oh, they're very good at G. And that illustrates the point perfectly. The reason why ESG is pointless is because it thinks governance is important. It thinks society is important. Even saying that the environment is important is relatively fatuous. So the environment isn't the issue. Climate change is. The problem is we've got 420 particles per million of carbon in the atmosphere for the first time in the history of the human race. The history of the human race has not seen the carbon concentration in the atmosphere go beyond 300 particles per million. We've not only exceeded 300, we've now exceeded 400. That's the reason why the globe is warming. It is as simple as that. Why are these people wasting their time? You know, they're killing themselves as well as us by ignoring all of this. Tell the story the way it is. Stop looking in the wrong direction. And of course, because the bulk of the PR leaders are talking in this vague, meaningless way, then when you do a survey of what people think, they will say, oh, well, we don't think necessarily it's happening the way it's happening, or because they're confused. Because the whole climate change movement has lacked leadership. And it's taken Greta Thunberg to come, you know, a 16-year-old. We knew this was happening 40 years ago. Al Gore set up his first Senate subcommittee 40 years ago because climate change and carbon emissions were a problem. Here we are 40 years later. Not only have we not solved it, we've allowed it to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, so much so that we are now facing potential catastrophe. And that's how bad our misuse of language has been. So the narrative is unbelievably important. The narrative is climate change. The narrative is the fight against climate change. The narrative is 420 particles per million. It is no other. And anybody who starts to tell the story in a different way is trying to distract you and deviating away, consciously or unconsciously, in a way that is self-destructive. So that's the way I tell the story, Sarah.
I understand that completely. Very strong message there, and I have definitely seen the word greenwashing in my inbox more times this year even than ever before, and specifically in regard to finance. But I don't want to end on such a negative note, really. I did want to come back to that investment opportunity. So I'd like to ask, perhaps as a closing question, to look at where you are seeing some of the major funding gaps. So where is there now this biggest opportunity to close the gap? And I know you.
Yeah. So sorry, Sarah.
Sorry, and I know you mentioned that you can't simply say something like wind or hydrogen. You really need to go a little bit deeper than that. But perhaps if we could keep it brief.
Yes, I have a very simple answer to that question. The biggest gap actually is at the startup and early stage. So it's not so much a sector, or rather, it's not so much an economic sector, it's an investment sector. So the biggest gap, you know, we're swamped. We're absolutely swamped. We are turning deals away in their hundreds, and lots of them are really, really good deals. We don't want to do that. When I say we don't want to do that, I don't just mean Green Angel Syndicate. I mean, we as the UK economy, UK society, we as a global economy and a global society, We don't want to do that. We want to get these innovations. We want to get as much resource behind these innovations as we possibly can, and encourage them and support them as much as we possibly can, and scale them up as quickly as we possibly can to make a difference. And so that gap in that very early stage funding is the one that is right now the most significant, and it is slowing things down.
Got it. And Nick, I'd love to stay and chat all afternoon, but that is all the time we have. I know we're slightly over our meeting time, so I hope you don't have another call. So I guess all that remains is to thank you so much for your time and for your insight.
It's a real pleasure, Sarah. Thank you.